All rise.
All right, please be seated. We're back on the record, and I think the attorneys want to bring up a few matters.
Your Honor, we were alerted by our investigator that one of the deputies downstairs was apparently having a conversation with a member of the press about the fact that well, I shouldn't say the fact, we don't know what the facts are, but was sort of admonishing this person, and the press representative was acknowledging the admonishment that that her guys should not follow a juror again. That was the substance, as I understood what was overheard. So we had alerted Ms. Liu in the hope that maybe the deputy who actually had the conversation could be contacted and elucidate what that was about. We don't have any independent information beyond overhearing just the tail end of that conversation.
All right, and do we know which media outlet we're talking about?
I don't believe so. Oh,
Okay, I do think.
may actually be the person who's in the courtroom here.
Okay, well, who do you mean? I don't know who's who here.
Is that you? Can you come forward?
And you're fine speaking from there. Can you shed any light on this?
Yes, we have a scheduled live report, and we noticed that a juror was next to our camera, and I wanted to ask the deputy if there was any way that we could work around this, if they could request a juror to move, and they said that they couldn't, so then we just canceled our report.
Okay. So your effort was to try to prevent reporting while the juror was present? Is
Correct.
okay. And just so I have a sense of this, what area are you reporting from?
We were told to be in that corner right outside the courtroom. That is where we've been.
Okay. What I can do, since this is a long trial, and to try to further, it sounds like efforts were made to try to prevent an inappropriate observation by the juror. What I can do, though, to make this less likely to happen is require the jurors, when they go out for their lunch break, to immediately get into the elevators and depart the building. Because I would be concerned about, I'm thankful that you observed a juror was there and managed to cut the broadcast. I would be fearful, though, of a broadcast occurring and someone not knowing that a juror was there. So towards that concern, my thought would be to require the jury to vacate the building if they're going to vacate the building, as opposed to be back in the jury room. Was there any further follow-up you would want on that?
No, and Your Honor, obviously there's some other lounges in the building that would be more appropriate, but if the press has been instructed to be in that corner, probably just notifying the jury, that's the press's corner, and the rest of us aren't going to be using it much.
Okay,
And
all right.
you should avoid it.
Right, no, I think that's a good thing to do, and when they come back in here without drawing too much attention to it, I'll so instruct them. Yes.
I did bring this up the first day, and I also requested the PIO if we could move to the other corner as an alternative. We're happy to.
Well, let me ask you this. What is your thoughts on reporting from a different, all the floors look essentially the same. What's your thought about being on a different floor?
I'm happy with that.
Is that something we can work out?
I will have to coordinate with Ms. McCarthy because we are concerned about having an immense press set up on other floors where other courts have active matters.
Well, for now, I'll give them an instruction to vacate the building quickly, and we'll look at potential other options. But for now, that's what we'll do. All right. Thank you. And was there anything else?
It may be becoming less of a concern as we get later in the afternoon, but just wanted to bring up a potential scheduling issue, and that is we plan on calling Mr. Damon O'Brien this afternoon.
Okay.
And Dr. Stauffenberg, so the on-scene medical examiner and then the autopsy medical examiner.
Okay.
in consultation with defense, it doesn't sound like they're going to be incredibly long witnesses total. The scheduling issue is that Detective Merrill is supposed to follow up with them. He had a matter he had to take up back at the police bureau between 2 and 2:30.
Okay.
And of course, during the planning phase, we thought, oh, that's not going to be a big deal. And then, of course, we find ourselves that it may. As I said, as we're getting later in the afternoon, I think it's less of a concern. I think he'll be back and available by 3:15. I'm sorry, his matter was between 2:30 and 3. I think I said
2:30 and 3.
2:30
Okay,
and
so
3.
he'd be back at 3:15.
He'll be back by 3:15. So I just wanted to let the court know that despite our best efforts, we may end up with a little bit of a bigger afternoon break.
Okay.
After Dr. Stauffenberg and until Detective Merrill returns.
And do you anticipate any witnesses after Detective Merrill?
No, I think that we're taking him up on a limited matter this afternoon, but I think he'll either take us up to 5 o'clock or that limited matter may finish earlier before 5 o'clock and then we would be done for today.
Okay, all right. Appreciate the information. So why don't we go ahead and bring the jury back?
Okay, I will go ahead and get the jury. I'll keep the record running, Judge.
Yeah, let's just keep it rolling.
Okay.
She just did that to me. I'm sorry, what does that say? This is keto. It does not say that because there's no curly Q over the K. Exactly. Yes, I hate that. What? I do. I know that. Oh, no, you feel it. I don't know if I'll pour it. Well, I mean, go. It is the flip chart. We'll see. Yep. I feel like it'll be fine. I can go talk to them.
All rise for the jury.
All right, everyone, please be seated. And before we start, I just want to say to the jury that, at the beginning, I talked to everyone about how important it is not to try to seek outside information on the case, and I have no reason to think that anybody is. With that in mind, however, when you go on your lunch breaks and you're headed to the elevators, there tend to be a lot of people that may be congregating on this floor, especially in the corner and hallways. Some of them media, some of them just people who are watching the trial who may be speaking about the trial. So what I'm going to require you to do when you go on those kinds of breaks is not to linger in that area, to just essentially get on the elevators and leave as quickly as you can, but not to use that sort of lounge area as somewhere to stay. So with that, I will turn to the state and ask who their next witness is.
Your Honor, the state will call Damon O'Brien.
Okay? All right, if we can just have you come up here to the witness box, and we'll have you actually step into it, but not take a seat just yet. Just go on in and stand by the chair. And Ms. Liu here will give you an oath.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then you can be seated, and then you can go ahead and remove your mask. And because we're being recorded, I'll just ask you to state your name and spell it.
Name is Damon O'Brien, DamonObrien.
All right, you can inquire.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. O'Brien, where are you employed?
Multnomah County Medical Examiner's Office,
And what is your position there?
Deputy Medical Examiner,
And how long have you been a deputy medical examiner?
15 years.
What kind of training is required to become a deputy medical examiner?
I was a EMTI, Emergency Medical Technician, intermediate. My major was criminology, and I graduated from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department Crime Scene Academy.
Okay. And so, is there a level of education that is required besides the training that goes into it, but a level of education that's required?
You need at least 2 years of college,
Okay, so like an associate's degree or something
associate's
equivalent?
degree minimum, yeah.
Okay. And after you receive that associate's degree, you have to then receive some sort of specific training?
Usually it's not required, but in order to be competitive to get the position, you usually normally do.
Okay. And you were already certified as an EMT or an
Yes.
EMTI?
Yes.
Is there a difference between an EMT and an EMTI?
EMT paramedic is just 3 different levels: EMT basic, EMTI, and EMT paramedic.
I see. And you were an EMTI?
Correct.
And how long did you do that for?
I did that for about a year and a half.
Okay.
Back in the 90s.
Oh, okay. And then from there, what did you do next professionally?
I became a forensic medical technician at the Las Vegas Coroner's Office for 7 years.
Okay. And is that something you had to receive specific training for?
I went through the Las Vegas Crime Scene Academy for that.
Okay. Now, I know in different states it's different. Some criminalists are actually sworn police officers.
Right, down there, they're civilian.
They're civilian
Yes.
in Nevada,
Yes,
Okay.
or in Las Vegas.
or at least in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Okay. And you did that, you said, for about 7 years?
Yes, I was there for about 7 years.
And then what did you do after that professionally?
I moved up here and got a job with Multnomah County.
As a deputy medical examiner?
Correct,
Okay. And you've been doing it ever since?
correct.
Okay. Could you kind of describe what some of your duties are as a deputy medical examiner?
The biggest duty we have is we're one of the first responders to any death scene out in the field. We try to like triage each case to find out what type of response is needed and record everything we see, everything we smell, everything we hear to the forensic pathologist. On a homicide, it's obvious, that we don't have to triage how we're going to investigate it. So we're usually notified by the homicide division that we have a case when we respond.
So you don't just respond to homicides, is that correct?
No, we respond to anything that's not natural, that's not in a hospital setting.
Anything that's not in a hospital setting?
Not everything. Sometimes people pass away from natural causes at home. We don't respond to all of those, just things that we don't know what happened or things that we that are not natural: overdoses, accidents, homicides, suicides, things like that.
And when you respond to one of these scenes, assuming law enforcement has already been on scene, possibly paramedics or fire, when you get there, what kind of role do you take and how do you work with law enforcement at that?
First thing I do when I arrive on scene is I get in contact with the detectives who are working. I get a brief explanation of what is known, what is seen, and most of the times, very little is known at this time. And after that, I'm escorted inside the scene where I will make observations and take a few photographs for the doctor. Those observations are put into a report that I give to our doctor.
Okay. And I know you're speaking generally of kind of every scene that you go to.
Correct.
But I want to take you back to June of 2018. Were you a medical examiner then?
Correct.
Okay. And were you called out to the Oregon Culinary Institute located at Southwest Jefferson and 17th?
Yes, I was.
And I should have asked you this a little bit ago, but is it just one deputy medical examiner that's dispatched to a scene?
Correct.
Okay. Is there ever a situation where more than one goes?
Very rare, but normally no.
Okay. In the case of where there's just one victim, they would just send one?
Correct.
Okay. So you responded to the scene that day. Do you recall who summons you to the scene?
I don't recall.
Would it have
Sometimes
been
it could either be homicide division or it could be dispatch.
I see. Okay. But you respond to either?
Correct.
Okay. And you kind of touched on this on what your role is there, and or kind of what some observations that you make while you're out there. But ultimately, what are you trying to do? Why is somebody in your profession actually sent there, and what is the end goal, I guess?
The most important thing is for us to be the eyes and ears for the forensic pathologist. The forensic pathologist doesn't go to the scene. The investigator will go to the scene. In a homicide, we record everything we observe and pass that along to the doctor. Other cases, we will look at things to, like I said, triage to decide what level of investigation this should accompany, whether we need to bring out more resources or individuals. Sometimes something's reported as suspicious, and we go in and take a look at things to see if it requires, crime scene response or homicide response or not so much.
Okay. And I'll get to that in just one second, but you mentioned a forensic pathologist. Is that the medical examiner that does the actual autopsy?
Correct.
Okay. And so you're gathering all of this information to share with that person for when they do conduct the autopsy?
Correct.
Okay. And you've already said you responded to the Culinary Institute on June 2nd. When you got there, is one of the first steps to kind of gather a little bit of information?
Yes.
Okay. And who do you generally get that information from?
Usually the lead detective or the sergeant detective.
And do you also walk the scene as well?
Not until I'm escorted in by the homicide division, but I don't do entire scenes. We're more respond to just the body. So we're escorted towards the body.
And what I'm getting at, this is a pretty big building that this occurred in. So meaning you didn't walk around that entire
No, I
building?
did not.
Okay. Were you directed to the kitchen where Mr. Brophy was?
Yes, I believe it was kitchen number 2.
Okay. Now, I know you said kitchen number 2, but were you aware of that building? Did you know, was that information that somebody said to you? Or
Yeah, I was like I said, I was briefed by homicide detectives before I even went into the scene.
Gotcha.
Told me what it was. This is a culinary institute with multiple kitchens and classrooms.
I see. Okay. And ultimately, you're guided into this room where you are shown where the victim is laying, I suppose. Could you kind of briefly describe, just in your own words, what you were seeing when you first walked into that kitchen?
Well, the first thing I saw, obviously, was the decedent was in laying on his back. His feet were towards the sink. His head was towards the middle of the room. It's kind of a smaller room with an open middle. The shirt had been cut and having his chest removed for CPR purposes. There was some emergency medical paraphernalia on the decedent and around him. That's the first thing I noticed.
Okay. Was there anything else as you got into the room that kind of jumped out at you as something that would be important to share with the autopsy doctor?
One of the things, it wasn't something that I observed, but I was told that the water was on in the sink. And that, I don't remember if that was still on when I was there or whether it had been turned off. I don't remember, but I was informed that it had been on. So I told the doctor that.
And what did that mean to you, if any significance?
No one was there to shut it off.
As you decide what your next steps are and what you're going to, is your next step to decide how the death occurred, or are you doing other sort of fact finding as you move through your process?
I try to see if there's any obvious points of interest. One of the interesting things was blood transfer was turned out to be from medical. They're doing CPR. They're trying to save his life, and there was some blood transfer that wasn't part of the original scene. It's what we call artifact of resuscitation efforts. I noticed that, and I asked about it, and I was informed. It's like, yeah, the paramedic said that was done, during resuscitation efforts. And I, observed immediately 2 injuries to his front chest, and later we found 2 more injuries to his back.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 34. It should pop up on your screen there in just a moment. It might take a second. Is that on your screen there?
Yes.
Just making sure. Okay. Can you kind of describe, as you're examining the body, what you were seeing, and if you could, actually, there's a pointer right behind that monitor that you could expand.
Excuse me.
And once you identify it on your screen, if you could turn around and kind of just point to it,
Okay.
what you're looking at and what you're thinking at that point.
All right. Well, I'm seeing an obvious penetrating wound. There it is. And another smaller wound right here.
Okay. And could you describe, is there a difference between those 2 wounds?
One is a circular pattern, and one is more of a irregular, linear, where you can actually reapproximate the injury. If you were to pinch together, it would fit like a puzzle piece, but the other wound, more in the center of the chest, is a circular wound.
And what does that tell you?
It's consistent with a penetrating gunshot wound.
The one in the center of the chest?
One in the center of the chest is, yes.
Okay. And you're saying a penetrating gunshot wound, meaning it would have come from in front into the chest, or meaning it's a penetrating?
It's what it appears. The forensic pathologist says this definitely did this, and it went this way. So
understood. But at that point, that's what you were thinking.
Correct.
Okay. And then you mentioned the other wound on the sort of left side of the midline there. And how did you describe that?
It's kind of an irregular wound. It's not like a linear wound. It's more of a different kind of shape to it.
What did you think
It
about
kind of
that?
suggested a possible partial exit, or an exit, incomplete exit.
Okay.
Maybe a bullet fragment or bone.
Okay. So not an entrance wound?
No.
Okay. Now, was it your understanding that Mr. Brophy was wearing clothing on his torso at the time?
Correct.
Okay. And when you identified this center entrance wound on his chest, was there a corresponding hole in his clothing for that entrance wound?
I don't have any memory of that, but I believe when I reviewed my report that I mentioned corresponding defect to the shirt, okay, with the one in the center of the chest, but not with one just to his left.
Okay. Would it help if you took a look at your report real briefly on that issue?
Yeah, actually.
Do you have it with you, or do you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And specifically, I'll draw your attention to the second page of your written report. right at the very top.
Yeah, I put with an mind if I just read the sentence here?
Well, how about you read it to yourself, and then I'll ask you if that helps refresh your recollection.
Yes,
Okay, so you've read that?
correct,
Okay, and you did write this, correct?
correct.
And was this written shortly after your?
Same day, that afternoon.
Okay, so now that you've reviewed it, does it refresh your recollection as to whether there was a corresponding hole in the shirt to that chest wound?
My report reflects that there is a corresponding defect to the shirt.
Okay. And I think you already sort of indicated this, you seem to be a little bit more sure about it, but the one on the left side of his chest, was there a corresponding defect in the shirt for that one?
I did not observe one.
Okay. And was that consistent with what you were thinking as far as that being a potential exit wound and then the other one being a potential entrance wound?
Correct.
And I apologize to everyone observing. Your Honor, I did not announce that there was going to be some graphic photos. I apologize, but the next two photographs will also be graphic. And so, Mr. O'Brien, we're going to show you what's marked as Stakes Exhibit 38. And Mr. O'Brien, if you could tell us what you were doing here and why.
Okay. Well, actually, that's probably looks like my left hand there.
Oh, okay.
And probably the crime scene analyst probably took this photograph, it looks like. But I'm rolling him to see basically the back of the shirt.
And in this photograph, I see a sort of a darker mark in the middle of his back. Did you observe that as well?
Correct.
Was that a hole in the jacket?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Was there only one hole in that jacket?
I believe I only noticed one.
And we're going to show you what's marked as States Exhibit 39. And could you tell us what we're looking at here?
That looks, that's a gunshot wound. Actually, that wound is an incomplete exit. If you look closely, and I believe the doctor looks at these a lot closer than I do. I'm still at the scene, but you could see a portion of the bullet within the margins of that wound. It was an incomplete exit.
I see. Is that sort of similar to that incomplete exit that you were reviewing on Mr. Brophy's left chest?
No, it would be a little bit different because this would it appeared to be a short exit, but that's once again that's something the forensic pathologist would confirm.
Sure. And I'm not going to show you a photograph of it, but when you pull his shirt up a little bit farther, did you see another bullet wound?
Yeah, there's another further up on the back. There is another circular penetrating gunshot wound to the back.
Did that appear to be an entrance wound?
It was consistent with an entry wound, yes.
Did that line up with the hole that was in the jacket?
It did.
Okay. So at this point, were you thinking that there was potentially two penetrating gunshot wounds?
Yes.
Okay. Were you provided with information that there was two shell casings located at the scene?
Yes, I was also informed that they were moved by paramedics when they first responded, or possibly could have been moved.
Okay, based on the physical evidence that you located on Mr. Brophy and the information about the two shell casings, did you form the opinion that there was just, in fact, two shots?
From what I saw, it appeared to be only two shots.
The entrance wound into the back and partial exit on the front left chest, did those appear to you to be consistent with one shot?
Yes.
Okay. And the entrance wound on the center of Mr. Brophy's chest and the partial exit on the lower left back, did that appear to be consistent with one shot?
It was consistent, yes.
Did you form any opinions as to which shot would have likely come first at that point?
No, I don't form those types of opinions.
Okay, fair enough. We can go ahead and take the photo down. And Your Honor, at this time, I'd move to admit State's Exhibits 34, 38, and 39.
No objection.
And are admitted.
And Mr. O'Brien, I just have a couple other questions. When you're doing an examination of a deceased person, is one of your things that you do to search the person himself, meaning search through the clothing, see if there's anything on him?
Not extensively on a homicide. At most, I'll look for a wallet so we can get a positive identification with ID. But the rest I usually leave for processing at the forensics laboratory at the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office.
Meaning when the person is, before they receive an autopsy?
Yeah, they'll process the clothing, the body forensically prior to the autopsy. That's when all that is done.
So
But I'll pull out a wallet if I find one.
Okay. And to do that, do you generally go to the common pockets that you might expect to find a wallet?
Correct.
Like the back pants pocket, something like that? Okay. Did you find a wallet on Mr. Brophy on this day?
I don't remember.
Sure. Would you mind taking a look at your
Absolutely.
report? Same page, page 2 on the second paragraph. And once again, just go ahead and read it to yourself and I'll follow up.
Yes.
Okay. Now after reading that, did that refresh your recollection?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall whether or not you found a wallet on Mr. Brophy?
It was in his front shirt pocket.
And did you open that wallet?
I don't remember if I opened it or if I just handed it off to one of the forensic criminalists at the scene.
Okay, to be collected for evidence?
Correct.
Okay. Did you have any further, was there anything else that you did in order to investigate Mr. Brophy's death?
Yeah. The last portion of what I do, of course, is to try to protect any type of evidence, trace evidence, or any evidence that may be on the body. That's why my examination on these cases are so limited out at the scene. I'll place the body inside of a secured pouch, along with putting paper bags on the hands to protect any trace evidence that may be on the hands. Then that body bag is sealed with a numbered seal.
Okay. And did you place paper bags over Mr. Brophy's hands
Yes, I did.
at the scene? And you secure that with tape or something?
Tape, yes.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I don't think I have any other questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. O'Brien, I just have a couple of questions for you. I think you covered everything else. Did you then transport the body back to the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
And I don't know that you told us what time you responded. Does your report indicate, or do you remember what time you arrived at OCI at the coroner's?
Yeah, it should be in my report here. Yeah, I arrived at 15:21 hours, which is 3:21 p.m.
Great, thank you. That's all I have.
No redirect, thank you. For the state, yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you can step down. Ms. Herman?
Thank you, Your Honor. The state will call Dr. Michelle Stauffenberg to the stand.
Okay. All right, Dr. Stauffenberg, we'll have you come up and step into the witness box, but just stay standing for a moment after you get in there.
All right.
And then my clerk will give you an oath when you're ready. All right, go ahead and raise your hand.
Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, then you can be seated. You can take off your mask as well, and then because we're being recorded, I will ask you to state and spell your name.
All right.
And could I have
Right,
you
if you
state?
could, yeah, if you could just state your name and spell it too.
Yes, Michelle Taylor Stauffenberg, Michele Stauffenberg.
All right, and there is water there if you would like any. And then when you're ready, Ms. Herman?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Stauffenberg.
Hello.
Can you start with how you are employed?
Yes, I am a deputy state medical examiner for the state of Oregon.
And does that mean you are a licensed medical doctor?
Yes, I'm a medical doctor. I am licensed to practice medicine in the state of Oregon.
And what are the requirements for your position?
In order to be a deputy state medical examiner, you have to complete medical school, a residency in pathology, a fellowship in forensic pathology, and then you need to be board certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
And could you explain to the jury what your personal educational background is to kind of accomplish all those steps?
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Texas at Dallas. I graduated summa cum laude. I then completed medical school at the University of Texas, Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, earning my medical doctor or MD degree. I then completed a residency, a 5-year residency in pathology at Parkland Hospital in Dallas. And then I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and completed a 1-year residence or fellowship in forensic pathology.
And what about board certifications that you described in some of those requirements? Do you have those?
I have boards in all 3 areas of pathology: anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
And how long have you worked at the Oregon Medical Examiner's Office?
I've worked for the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office since November of 2017.
All right. And you've mentioned both the term pathology and autopsy. Can you start with pathology, what that means, and then give us the definition or explanation of what autopsy means?
Yes. Pathology is a specialty of medicine that deals with disease processes. The responsibilities for a pathologist are extremely varied. It might include anything from examining specimens that come from the operating room. It might involve examining biopsies and making a diagnosis, making diagnoses of blood diseases from a blood smear, managing a hospital medical laboratory, and it also includes autopsy pathology. An autopsy, the best way I can describe it is it's a physical examination that I perform on my patient who happens to be dead. The autopsy begins with examining the outside of the body. If there are clothing items with the body, then I examine those as well. Once the clothing is removed, the body is cleaned so that I can look at the surface and see if there are any injuries or abnormalities that would indicate the cause or manner of death. And then I do an internal examination where the body is opened and I can examine the organs as they sit in the body. And then I examine them once they're removed from the body, once again looking for injuries or abnormalities that would tell me the cause or manner of death.
And in your current capacity at the Oregon State Medical Examiner's office, what sorts of patients do you receive? Are they all subject to a criminal investigation, or what does that look like?
Any case that is sudden or unexpected in an otherwise healthy person, any death that's due to trauma or injury or poisoning, to include drug overdoses, anything that is suspicious in nature would be or fall under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner's office.
And we heard just before your testimony from Mr. O'Brien, who talked a little bit about his responsibilities on scene. When you are notified that a patient is coming in and that you have an autopsy to perform, what information do you receive? What do you review? What does that look like before you actually go into the autopsy?
The information that I receive on a case before the exam usually consists of whatever report I can get from the investigator, in this case, Damon O'Brien. And that may be a written report, or it may be a verbal report where he can brief me on the case and what to expect. Essentially, I get the bare bones of what sort of injury it is and how it came to be. But a lot of the details either don't apply to my examination, or I find out about them much later.
And I imagine in some cases it may be more obvious when you're going into an autopsy what you're looking for, and in others a lot less so. Is that true?
Yes.
All right. And typically, and I guess we'll talk specifically in this case, did you conduct an autopsy of Daniel O'Brien?
Yes, I did. Oh, no. Daniel Brophy.
Brophy, excuse me. And as part of that examination, I'm jumping ahead, but do you categorize and record in some manner what's happening during that autopsy?
Yes, I prepare an autopsy report detailing my findings from the examination.
And how do you take notes or keep track of that as you're going through?
Well, at the time that I did this examination, I dictated the report into a recorder, and it was transcribed for me by a transcriptionist. Nowadays, I have to type my own.
All right. And then once you've completed the autopsy, do you ultimately take, whether you're typing it or you're taking the transcription, do you author a report?
Yes.
And did you specifically author a report related to the autopsy of Daniel Brophy?
Yes, I did.
And is that report number 18-1566?
Yes.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 67. And does that look familiar to you?
Yes, this is a copy of the report that I prepared on the examination of Daniel Brophy.
And I would offer State's Exhibit 67.
No objection.
All right, 67 is admitted.
All right. So Dr. Stauffenberg, when did the autopsy of Mr. Brophy take place?
That was on Sunday, June the 3rd, 2018.
And is that timeline fairly consistent when autopsies are, generally speaking, performed?
Yes, they're generally performed within the first day or two after they're reported to our office.
And where was the autopsy conducted?
At the Oregon State Medical Examiner's office in Clackamas.
And at the time you conducted the autopsy, had Mr. Brophy already been identified, or how does that process occur?
I believe the body had already been identified at the time that it was delivered to our office. That may be done by a number of ways. Sometimes it's done by comparison with a photo ID. Sometimes the identification is made by someone who knows them, recognizing them. In cases that are difficult to identify or there's no comparison available, we may be able to collect fingerprints or something else along the way that we can use for a comparison.
In this case with Mr. Brophy, what sort of, when you receive Mr. Brophy's body, what is that, and specifically in this case, what did that look like, and what is the sort of the first step of your examination?
The body came to me in a body bag and a white shroud. It's like a plastic wrapper. He was wearing clothing and his hands were covered by paper bags. And so the first step is to examine the body with the clothing intact. Photographs are taken. The bags are removed and I examine the hands. In this case, there wasn't really any trace evidence to collect from the hands, but I at least looked at them visually. The clothing is removed and I examined the clothing in this case and found that there were defects in the fabric of the clothing that corresponded to wounds on the body. Once the clothing has been removed and examined, then I examined the outer surface of the body.
And talking first about the hand examination, we heard already from Mr. O'Brien sort of the purpose for putting the bags over the hands. What does that examination look like? And in this case, what did you determine or not determine?
In this case, I described that there's no blood spatter or coating of blood in a heavy distribution on either hand. In this case, since there were no collections of trace evidence that I could collect, my examination consisted of removing the bags and looking at the hands front and back to see if there was any injury or indicator of something that I needed to be looking at closer.
And I think you mentioned this already, but in Mr. Brophy's case, was there anything of note?
No.
And then you talked about examining the clothing. Is part of that process looking in pockets or looking for things that may be various places depending on what kind of clothing they're wearing?
Yes, I generally detail what items of clothing come in and any other items that come in with the body, whether in pockets or attached to the clothing or whatever.
In Mr. Brophy's case, did you locate anything in his pockets?
Yes. Let's see, he had $17 in United States currency in the right front pants pocket. He had a green and purple folding pocket knife and a packet containing 2 pain reliever tablets. The left front pocket had a packet of ultra spicy peanut snacks, a note with an IOU to Joseph Taylor, and $60 in United States currency. A Sharpie pen is in the left front pocket of the jacket, and that's all I noted in pockets.
And if a wallet had been removed from his person at the scene, would that be something you would examine, or would that have come in separately from the body?
I may or may not ever see the wallet. Sometimes the investigator can examine the wallet. Sometimes the police will examine the wallet, but I may or may not receive the wallet. Sometimes it comes in by accident if somebody forgets to check the pocket, or if they're not able to check the pocket, then I'm able to see the wallet when the body comes in.
And did you notice anything else on Mr. Brophy's body, such as keys or anything like that?
Yes, he had carabiner type keychain attached to his pants that had some keys on it.
And so were those keys outside of his pockets?
Yes.
Hanging like from a belt loop?
Yes.
All right. And then you mentioned that you examined the clothes that Mr. Brophy was wearing and saw some defects. Can you talk about those?
Yes. He had some defects on the front of the shirt and the jacket that he was wearing. He had defects on the back of the shirt and jacket that he was wearing. And those defects were more or less in a position similar to wounds on the body.
And we have seen some photographs and heard some testimony already that Mr. Brophy's shirt was cut during medical intervention at the scene. Is that something you like put back together to look at it?
What I generally do is once the clothing is removed from the body, I'll lay it out on a table and fold the two halves of the shirt back together and kind of put it together like a puzzle if I can, so that I can see what it looks like before it's cut.
And then I think what you described is you're looking at any defects in the clothing and then matching those or comparing those to any wounds or injuries you see on the body.
Yes, I don't make a strong comparison between clothing and body. My main focus is on the wounds on the body, because making a hole through a shirt doesn't result in death, but making a hole in the body can result in death.
All right. And so you examined all of Mr. Brophy's clothing and you walked through sort of that piece, and you said the next step is that you then examine the exterior of the body before it's cleaned. Is that correct?
I generally take a quick look at the body before it's cleaned and try to identify any gunshot wounds. One of the things I'm looking for in the unwashed body is evidence of gunshot residue, meaning gunpowder or soot, because those things deposited on the skin can indicate how far away the gun was when it was fired. Once I've satisfied myself that there isn't any gunpowder, there isn't any soot on the skin, then I can wash it and get a good look at the gunshot wounds.
And what did you do specifically, or what did that portion of the examination look like specifically in Mr. Brophy's case?
In this case, I was able to examine the body and I did not find any evidence of gunpowder or soot on the skin. And then once the body was washed, I was able to examine the wounds further.
And I want to talk about that next. At the time that the body is cleaned and you're looking at wounds, are you looking at Mr. Brophy's chest first or back first?
Usually we examine the chest first. The bodies come in lying on their backs, and we remove the clothing while they're lying on their backs. So we essentially examine the entire body except for the back first, and then we can roll the body up and look at the back and see what injuries are back there.
No, Dr. Stauffenberg, if it's yours, but there was a cell phone I could hear, so just a reminder that cell phones do need to be turned fully off. Was that your phone?
I don't know.
Okay. All right, well, for anyone else, make sure your phones are off, and let's go ahead.
In this particular case, can you talk to us about the wounds that you observed?
Yes. He had a total of 4 wounds that I could see on the body. On the chest, he had a gunshot entrance wound in the center of his chest, and he also had an exit wound on the left side of the chest. But it wasn't a complete exit wound because the bullet was still in the body. It had come up to the skin and broken the skin, but it did not come all the way out. On the back, he also had an entrance wound, more or less in the middle of the back, and then down on the lower left back, he had an exit wound that still had the bullet under the skin. So 2 bullets, 2 entrance wounds, 2 incipient exit wounds. So it looks like an exit wound, but the bullet has not come out yet.
And I want to show you 2 photographs, and I'll just note to the court that these are both graphic photographs. If you can first look at State's Exhibit 44. And what are we looking at here?
In State's Exhibit 44, we're looking at Mr. Brophy's back, and the L-shaped measure is marking an exit wound that's on the left back. It's kind of a tear in the skin, and there's a bullet underneath it that was trying to come out but didn't quite come all the way out. On the lower center of what the picture that you're looking at, this is a gunshot entrance wound that's on his right back. It has all the features of an entrance wound. It's roughly circular. It has an abrasion around the edge, and it has a punched out appearance.
And now I'll show you State's Exhibit 45. And what are we seeing in this photograph?
In State's Exhibit 45, we're looking at the chest, or the front of his body. In this view, there is a gunshot entrance wound that's roughly in the center of the chest and sort of framed in that little L-shaped ruler. Next to it, at the lower part of the picture, we can see an exit wound, or an incipient exit wound, because the bullet is just underneath the skin. This is slightly to the left of the midline of the chest, and it has a little slit, and it has a bruise in the skin around it.
All right. And you can take this off. I would offer at this time State's Exhibits 44 and 45.
No objection.
All right, 44 and 45 are admitted.
And so Dr. Stauffenberg, you sort of walked us through the external examination, and I guess I'll just double check. Were there any other wounds or injuries or things of note that you determined during your external examination?
No.
Once you had completed that external examination, do you then conduct an interior examination?
Yes.
And in this specific case, with Mr. Brophy and looking at the 2 gunshot wounds, what does that entail, and what did you find? And you can go first chest wound and then the back wound.
All right. In this case, he has an entrance wound on the front and a bullet on the back that make up one track. He also has an entrance wound on the back and a bullet on the front that makes up the second track. The first track goes through the skin and the wall of the chest. The bullet next goes through the heart and creates a track through the heart that allows blood to come out into the chest. He had blood in the right chest and the left chest, as well as in the sac that surrounds the heart. Once the bullet had gone through the heart, it went into the left lung, and it came to rest underneath the skin of the left back. The second track goes into the back. It goes through the spinal column and the spinal cord. It enters the chest cavity from the back and makes a hole through the aorta, once again allowing blood to accumulate in the right and the left chest. It goes through the heart. So now we have 2 tracks through the heart, and we have blood in the sac around the heart as well. And it also goes through the left lung and comes to rest up here on the chest, where we saw that bruised area.
Talking first about the back wound, so the wound with the entrance in the back coming to the front that you just described. What is the direction of travel of that, and what would be the result? of that gunshot?
The direction is back to front, slightly upward, slightly right to left. The result of that gunshot is that it's gone through the aorta, it's gone through the heart, it's gone through the spinal cord. And so there are a number of things that would result from that. For one thing, he's lost a lot of blood. He has about 1 liter of blood that's still left in his left chest. That doesn't take into account any blood he may have lost outside his body. He also has about 1/2 liter in the right side of his chest and about 200 milliliters of blood around his heart. So it adds up to just less than 2 liters of blood that he's lost. A person ordinarily has about 5 liters of blood, period. So this is like 40% of his blood volume that now is not circulating and carrying oxygen. In addition, I mentioned that his spinal cord has been damaged, which means that from that point down, he would not be able to use any of his body parts that are below there. So his legs, he would not be able to walk or run with that kind of damage.
And in your medical opinion, would that shot alone have been able to cause his death?
Potentially.
And then looking at the second shot from the chest going through the back, what is the directionality and then impact or import of that shot?
That gunshot goes from front to back, downward, and slightly right to left. That gunshot also goes through the heart and allows blood to enter the chest cavities. So we've got loss of blood. In this case, we don't necessarily have a spinal cord injury, but he would eventually die from loss of blood.
And could you tell from your examination which shot occurred first?
No.
And, all right. Question for you. After concluding your examination, and as a result of that examination, were you able to determine to a reasonable degree of medical certainty the cause of death of Mr. Brophy?
Yes.
And what was that?
Gunshot wounds of torso.
And as a result of your examination, were you able to determine to a reasonable degree of medical certainty the manner of death of Mr. Brophy?
Yes.
And what was that?
Homicide.
Oh, and you talked, backing up, you talked about sort of your process before you wash the body of looking at the wounds and looking for stippling. Does the fact that Mr. Brophy was wearing clothing affect that analysis?
Yes, it can. If he's wearing clothing and the gun is close to the skin when it's fired, then the soot and the gunpowder that I'm looking for may end up on the clothing.
And following your examination and conclusion of the autopsy, is it your practice or your office's practice to then issue a death certificate?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 68. And do you recognize this document? We'll perhaps make it slightly bigger.
This appears to be a certificate of death from the Oregon Health Authority issued for Daniel Craig Brophy, listing as the cause of death gunshot wounds of torso and manner of death homicide, and it has my electronic signature.
Now for State's Exhibit 68.
No, Your Honor.
And Dr. Stauffenberg, after your examination, would you or can you say that the wounds you observed, both the gunshot wound to the back and the gunshot wound to the front, are consistent with Mr. Brophy being shot from his back first, so the entrance wound in the back to the front, while standing, and if he fell, then the second wound being caused from being shot front to back?
That is not inconsistent with what I see. I can't say for certain that that's what happened.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Stauffenberg. My name is Chris Wine-Miller. I don't think we've met before. There are a couple of terms that you used, and I think it might be helpful to go over those. Most recently, you were talking about stippling. Can you describe for the jury and for us a little bit more about what stippling is?
Yes, stippling is marks that are left on the skin by gunpowder striking the skin. In the process of firing a gun, there are essentially four things that come out of it. The bullet, gunpowder, which may be partially burned, soot, which is gunpowder that's more completely burnt, and gas that pushes the bullet down the barrel of the gun. If that gunpowder strikes the skin, each little grain that hits the skin is going to scrape it and make a tiny little scrape on the skin. Those little dot-like abrasions are referred to as stippling.
And is there a relationship between the heat of that gunpowder and whether it's actually been burned and stippling, or is that just a function of pressure? Is it pressure and heat that causes stippling, or just the pressure is what I understood you to say?
It's not so much the pressure, it's the fact that those pieces of gunpowder, at whatever temperature, they strike the skin, and as they strike it, they scrape it. It's similar to standing in a sandstorm on the beach or something like that with grains of sand striking the skin. Each one will scrape the skin and cause pain, leave a mark. In this case, we've got grains of gunpowder instead of sand. And those grains of gunpowder hit the skin and they each leave a little scrape that would be called stippling.
So are there times that you're also able to observe that there was actually some damage that occurred to the body from the heat of that process?
From the heat, not unless the barrel of the gun is touching the skin. If the gun is fired up close enough that the barrel touches the skin, the hot barrel of the gun will burn the skin. But other than that, there's really no temperature effect on the body from firing a gun.
And so the stippling that's coming from the gunpowder itself, are you able to observe in the clothing right around a wound the effect of stippling on cloth as well as on skin, or is that a term that you refer to only in the context of human skin?
It may deposit on the clothing. And so generally what I do is I look at the clothing with my eyes, and if I see it with my eyes, then I call it gunpowder as opposed to stippling. To me, stippling indicates an effect of gunpowder on skin. But if I see the gunpowder on the clothing, then I just call it gunpowder. In this case, I didn't make note in my report of any gunpowder that I was able to see.
Okay, and do you believe that you in fact looked for it and weren't able to find it?
Yes.
Okay. And if you had found something like that, you would have noticed it?
Yes, if I had seen something on the clothing, I would have made note of it in the report.
Okay. Would you expect with the type of shirt that he had, well, first of all, he was wearing two shirts when he first presented to you, is that true?
That's right.
And one was a t-shirt, and then there was an overshirt. Were you able to determine what the material of the overshirt was?
Let's see. I described it as a dark gray flannel shirt.
Do you have training to understand when you would expect, in terms of distance of the muzzle of the weapon from the shirt or from the skin, whatever it is that it first makes contact with? You have training to understand at what distance you would no longer expect to see any residue from the gunpowder residue specifically, or stippling?
That is the type of testing that's done by a firearms laboratory, so it would not be done by me.
Okay. You described at the very beginning of your testimony, you were talking about trace evidence. Could you define for us what that means, what you're looking for?
Yes, trace evidence just means anything that might need to be collected for a laboratory to examine. There are some types of cases where trace evidence means one thing, and other types of cases where trace evidence means something else. For instance, if someone has been touching or scratching somebody, then trace evidence may mean the material under their fingernails or the trimmings from their fingernails. But with a gunshot wound, there isn't a lot of trace evidence to be gotten from examining the body. Even looking for gunshot residue is unreliable. So generally we don't try and collect things off of the hands in the case of a gunshot case, whereas in other cases, it might be worthwhile to collect things that are sitting loosely on the skin.
And when you say we might collect, who typically is present for an autopsy?
Well, the autopsy is performed by me. I usually work with an assistant or an autopsy technician. There may be people visiting the autopsy and observing, such as police or district attorneys, but they're generally not hands-on examining the body. That's me.
Okay. And what does that arena look like? Could you just describe your workspace a little bit so we can picture where these other people are and where you're working?
Yes, we actually have a fairly large room in which we perform autopsies. We have room for 3 autopsies to be underway at the same time, although we generally just do one at a time. There is a large sink that has room to hook up the foot end of an autopsy gurney. So we can move the body in place, and I usually stand on one side of the body. The technician helping me stands on the other side of the body. Anybody else that's observing or visiting the autopsy, which can include learners and other people who have a particular need to be there, perhaps people from the forensic laboratory. They generally stay at the periphery around the table. And if they need to collect something, they'll step forward and then we hand it off to them.
All right. So in this case, did you hand off, for example, when you were done with it, did you hand off the items of clothing?
Yes.
And who did you hand those off to? Who would have been there to collect those?
It would have been somebody from the forensic laboratory or from the police department. It looks like we had 2 police officers there and 2 deputy district attorneys.
Okay. So do you know whose responsibility it was that day to take collection of those items that you thought had potential forensic significance?
I don't recall who it was.
And was there somebody in charge of taking photographs of those items as you started to process the body and remove the things that were to the exterior of the body? Who would have been photographing those items?
Photographing the clothing, I don't recall that we had anybody specifically photographing the clothing, but photographing the body, I took those photos.
All right. Well, let me ask, Mr. Breton, would you pull up first, Defense Exhibit 214? You had testified earlier, Ms. Herman had asked you right at the beginning of your testimony about some things that you found in the clothing, items in the pockets. Do you remember testifying that you found $17 in US currency?
Yes.
Does that appear to be a photograph of that currency?
It looks like 17 $1 bills to me. Yes.
Do you have a recollection of what the denominations of those bills were?
No, I didn't make note of the individual denominations in my report.
Okay, but that appears to be a photograph that would have been consistent with that and taken perhaps at the autopsy.
Yes.
And Mr. Breton, if you pull up 215. Thank you. Can you read that?
Yes, this appears to be a note regarding a Joseph Taylor will pay next week. And in my notes, my report, I described a note with an IOU to Joseph Taylor.
All right. Now, when you're reading that, is there anything on that that indicates that, though, that it's to Joseph Taylor as opposed to Joseph Taylor's writing the IOU?
I don't know for certain. I can't tell.
That's a very difficult signature at the bottom there, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Is that consistent with your memory, though, of the IOU that you found in Mr. Brophy's pocket?
Yes, if I looked at this note and looked at my report, I'd say, oh, that must have been that note.
Those tie together. Okay, thank you. I just have a couple more questions for you, and you covered most of this with Ms. Herman. It sounds like, without looking beyond what you were examining in that autopsy arena at your office, really would be difficult to tell which shot was first and which was second.
That's right.
Might be possible looking at the crime scene and deducing that from additional evidence, but from what you were looking at on the table, he could have either been shot first at the front or in the back.
That's correct. I can't tell based on the features of the wound or the injuries that I saw.
Okay. You did indicate, though, that the shot to the back, the one that severed his spine, that he would have been unable to move after that.
Yes, based on the injuries that I saw.
Would you expect, based on those injuries, that he would have collapsed immediately?
Yes.
Would it be possible with that kind of severing of the spinal cord and the spine for somebody to maintain an erect posture for any length of time?
No.
You also indicated that that same bullet traveled not only through the spine and through the spinal cord, but went through his heart and severed his aorta. Is that correct?
It went through his heart and it made a track through his aorta, but it didn't completely sever it.
What does a track mean?
That means a hole the size of the bullet that I believe in this case it poked two holes. So it pokes a hole and going in, it pokes a hole coming out.
So straight through.
Right.
Okay. All right. And then after that, it went into his left lung?
Yes.
Well, how rapid would you expect the blood loss to be from a straight through like that in the aorta?
It would take enough time for blood to leave through that hole. So we've got about 2 liters of blood total in his chest, and so that would take at least a minute or two, depending on the blood pressure and the size of the hole.
And then you indicate with the other shot, the one that entered through the front, that was pretty well centered in the middle of his chest where it went in.
Yes, it was slightly to the right, 1/4 inch to the right of the anterior midline.
And again, with that wound, you didn't notice any stippling on the skin or anything on the shirt immediately over the skin?
That's right.
And again, that also hit his heart.
Yes.
Did it hit his heart in the same place?
Not in the same place, but there were 2 tracks through the heart. So one caused by one bullet, one caused by the other bullet.
But it sounds like what you're describing were remarkably lethal shots, that either one of those shots could have caused his death.
Yes, that's correct.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you. Oh, just 1 second. One more term that you used, it wasn't described, at least enough for us to understand exactly what it means. Maybe you could help us with that. What does it mean when you say the periphery of the wound was shored?
Shored. Shored indicates that the skin is supported as the bullet leaves the body or attempts to leave the body. So if the bullet is going out through the skin's really stretchy, and so it'll bend outward until it finally breaks and the bullet leaves. And if the skin is shored, if there's a support against it, like maybe the ground or some tight clothing or a car seat or anything that's up against the skin, then instead of stretching outward like that, the skin will stay in place and the bullet will punch a hole in the skin.
Okay. And the one that was observed of the 4 wounds that he suffered, the one that was observed.
Like someone has an electronic device on. All right. Let's make sure that it's kept quiet. All right, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Dr. Stauffenberg. So the shored wound, the one that was observed to have the shoring around the edge of it, of the 4 wounds, it was the exit, well, it wasn't really an exit wound, but the almost exit wound of the shot that had gone into the center of the chest and then came out in the lower back. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And specifically, I asked you about one shot there with 2 wounds, but the one that was shored would have been what would otherwise have been an exit wound in the lower back?
That's right.
Okay. So would we understand from that it seems more likely that that was the second shot because that he would have already succumbed. He would have been lying flat on the floor, and that wound, the reason the bullet couldn't get out is the cement floor.
It could be the cement floor. Like I said, it can be anything that's pushing against the skin. So I can't make any assumptions about which gunshot was first and which was second. All I can say is that they're both lethal and that neither one exited the body.
All right. But you could also say that what I just described would be consistent with, the shoring would be consistent with what would happen if he had already fallen to the floor. Then there's a second shot and the bullet has that hard surface against it.
It's not inconsistent with that, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions for you.
All right, redirect.
Just one redirect question, Your Honor. And you may have already covered this, Dr. Stauffenberg, I apologize, but in addition to the $17 in the one pocket, there was additional currency in another pocket, is that right?
Yes, in his left pocket, there was $60.
And that was independent of a wallet?
Yes.
No further questions.
All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
And defense?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, you can step down, Dr. Stauffenberg. And we are going to take our midday comfort break now. We'll plan to be on around 3:20. It may be slightly longer than that as we are waiting for a witness, but let's plan on being in recess till roughly 3:20.
I will go ahead and mute us on the WebEx, and we will be in recess. Good afternoon, this is the court clerk. We're getting ready to start back up again. So once again, I will remind everybody on WebEx to please make sure that you are muted with your video turned all the way off, and we'll be starting back up again in just another minute. Right?
All right, please be seated. Before we call the next witness, I just wanted to ask a question of the attorneys for planning purposes, and if you don't know the answer, that's completely fine. But as of right now, does either side anticipate that evidence will need to be presented on Friday? And we'll start with the state.
I do not believe so.
And well then,
No,
I guess
Your
that
Honor.
answers the question. I wanted the jurors to know that because I'm sure some of them have been wondering. But with that, let's call the state's next witness.
Mr. Honor, the state will call Detective Anthony Merrill.
All right. And I know, Detective Merrill, that you know where to stand, so go ahead and do that. And Ms. Lou, if you want to give him the oath.
Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated and remove your mask. And then, because we're being recorded, please state your name and spell it.
It's Anthony Merrill, Anthony, Merrill, Merrill.
All right, you can inquire when ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Merrill, where are you employed?
So I'm employed with the City of Portland as a police officer. I'm currently assigned as a detective with Portland Police Bureau.
And how long have you been in law enforcement?
I've been in law enforcement for 24 years. I was hired March 19th of 1998 with Portland Police.
All 24 years with Portland Police?
Yes.
And you said you're currently assigned as a detective?
Correct.
And how long have you been a detective?
So I've been a detective for 14 years.
How long have you been a homicide detective?
10 years.
And you're still currently assigned as a homicide detective?
I am, yes.
So I want to have you go back to before you were a police officer. And what kind of training and education did you receive to become a police officer?
So you go through a rigorous application process. It usually takes some time to go through a background investigation, written tests, oral interviews. Once you're offered a position, you're then assigned to go to the Oregon State Police Academy. And when I went, that was back in 1998, it was a 2-month state academy with the Department of Public Safety and Standards Training. So 2 months with the basic academy, and then after that, with Portland, they have their own advanced police academy, and that was a 3-month academy that I participated in. Once you get through those academies, then you're a field training officer. You're assigned to a veteran officer, and you're in a probationary period where you work with that officer for 18 months. And if you successfully pass through those, back then it was 3 phases, then you are able to go out on your own as a patrol officer after that. So
From the time that you start basic academy to the time you're out on the road by yourself, about how long is that?
So about 18 months total.
18 months total?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, maybe a little bit before, because you might be phase 3, and that's when you go on your own, but you're still reporting to a field training coach or officer.
And before you get hired, is there an education requirement?
Back at that time frame, Chief Moose was our chief, and they required a Bachelor of Arts degree, a 4-year degree at that time. So I have a Bachelor of Arts. I was a double major, political science and philosophy.
And where did you go to school?
I went to a school in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. It's called Lycoming College, liberal arts college.
And after you became a police officer, could you kind of describe some of the training that you had over the years that led up to you being a detective?
Sure. Each year we have annual in-service training. That's to keep up with our certification with first aid, shooting skills, qualifications, driving, patrol vehicle operations, police tactics, things of that nature. We also qualify with our handguns outside of the in-service training quarterly, so 4 times a year. I was assigned as a patrol officer at Central Precinct downtown for several years. Within that time frame, I was also assigned as a street crimes officer. Myself and another officer were assigned to the homeless youth in downtown on a bike unit. It was a street crimes unit that we worked for about 1.5 years. Later, I was assigned as a school resource officer with the formerly known as Madison High School off Northeast 82nd Avenue for a couple years. And then I was also a dignitary protection officer under Mayor Vera Katz's last year of administration in 2004 to 5. So that was about 9.5 years patrol experience. Then you can, to be promoted to, you can go 2 different routes with our job. You could become a supervisory sergeant, or you could apply to become a detective. I went and applied to become a detective. It's an application process where, again, you do a written test, oral interviews, panel interviews with investigators and personnel from other agencies in the United States come in and interview us, and then you see if you're offered the job from your administration. So I was promoted in 2007 to the rank of detective. And then with becoming a detective, you attend a 2-week detectives specialized training class with Portland Police Bureau that the detective division carries out. And after you're assigned as a detective, you go on a rotation of the different units. So I was assigned to robbery, afternoon general assignment we used to have back then, where you would take calls, any kind of calls. Also, cold case, homicide unit, I was assigned to the fraud unit. And then later, I became assigned to robbery for about a year. And then later, what's known as the enhanced community safety team, our version of that back then. I was assigned to that for a couple years as a detective. And then I came to homicide, and that was back in 2011.
Is there any special training that you have to become a detective or to maintain being a detective?
Yeah, we still are encouraged to take conferences, outside training, best practice training. So for instance, I've taken a lot of interview and interrogation type classes, crime scene classes offered by other agencies. Also, Oregon State homicide investigator conferences, which I've attended several times and presented case studies at a couple of times too.
I wanted to ask you something else regarding your training. Have you ever also been an instructor?
I was a defensive tactic instructor for several years as a patrol officer and for a while as a detective. But that's pretty much it.
And besides being a detective, I mean, it sounds like you were a patrol officer for a while. You were a detective that kind of sounds like you did quite a few different areas. Is it safe to say that you've investigated, whether as a patrol officer responding to the scene or a detective, a lot of robberies?
Yes, absolutely.
What about burglaries?
Yes, a lot of burglaries when I was a patrol officer, especially. And when I was assigned as a school resource officer, I actually took quite a few burglaries of the schools too. Yeah.
And this might be more of a common sense thing, but I think a lot of people sometimes mix up what is a burglary and a robbery. Could you clarify the difference between the two?
Well, yeah, burglary is breaking and entering into a building or a private residence and taking something, stealing something. So not only are you stealing, but you're breaking into a residence or a business. A robbery is where you use force to take control of that property from another individual.
So do you have to also, are there any certifications that you have to maintain as a detective?
Again, our annual in-service training, some years it's been specialized for investigators with the Portland Police Bureau. And some years, because of budget constraints, I think they've, just had us in the regular in-service with other patrol officers. So we've had a little of both.
As a homicide detective, can you kind of describe how the homicide unit of the Portland Police Bureau is structured? And
Yes.
actually, instead of how it's structured today, because it's my belief that it's a little bit different, but how was it structured back in 2018?
So yeah, I'll tell you from beginning in the unit in 2011 all the way through to 2018, the way it was structured then during my time frame, we had 10 investigators assigned to the homicide detail with Portland Police Bureau. So we had 5 teams of partners, so two partners, 10 people total. At any given time, every week, there would be a group of the 10 that's on call, usually 6 to 8. 2 of those investigators would be the primary investigators that would respond to any call out for a homicide suspicious death investigation, accidental death that's suspicious, kidnapping, officer-involved shooting, things of that nature. We would also have 2 other detectives called out with us as part of our on-call team to conduct any crime scene investigation. They'd be dedicated to that. Then we'd have 2 more support officers to maybe do canvassing, any odds and ends, any extras that we can think of. And if we had other individuals willing to be on call, 2 more people just to assist in that last endeavor where you're a jack of all trades. So that was how it functioned, and then 2 people would be off call that week, and it would rotate by week.
So under that structure, when a homicide would occur, is that whole team paged or called to come out to the scene?
It is, yes.
Except for the 2 that are lucky enough to be off at that time.
Right, yes.
And does that lead detective or that lead team, does that rotate as well?
It does on a weekly basis.
And you were a homicide detective back in June of 2018?
Correct.
And were you directed to go to the Oregon Culinary Institute on June 2nd?
I was. I remember it distinctly because it was a daytime call out. A lot of times, quite frequently, we get called out or paged out in the middle of the night, but this was a daytime incident. I was at work at my desk. My partner was sitting in the cubicle right next to me, and our sergeant at the time, who's now retired, Ken Wadham, walked up to our desk and said, we have a homicide, so you're the primary up team, and I need you to respond to the Oregon Culinary Institute at 1701 Southwest Jefferson Street. There's been a homicide there.
And you said it was unusual because it was daytime. Do you remember about what time that was that you were told to?
Yeah, my recollection was about 9:15 a.m., give or take, about that time frame.
And you mentioned your partner. Who was your partner at the time?
Detective Darren Posey.
Okay. And between the 2 of you, is one of you actually assigned to be the primary, and then the other one is just the sort of the co-lead or co-primary?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
Okay. And was Detective Darren Posey actually assigned as the lead at that point?
He was. Yep.
And I don't want to skip too far ahead, but as the investigation moved along, did you sort of take on more of a lead role in this investigation?
Yeah, Detective Posey transferred to another detail during this investigation, I should say, and I was assigned as the primary, and that's usually what would happen if you're the partner of the lead team and the other person leaves to another unit. That second partner would take the primary assignment.
Okay, so at some point in the investigation, you did actually take over and become the lead investigator.
Correct. Yes.
So you said you're directed to go to the Oregon Culinary Institute. How do you arrive there? Do you drive yourself, or we've heard about this mobile command center? I know we'll get into that, but are you in that, or are you driving yourself there?
At that time, we were assigned take-home cars. So we each had I believe everybody had their own individual take-home car. You would have your gear, in that car ready to go, your go bag and things of that nature. So we would respond individually. And I responded that day. I think I arrived in the area of the crime scene at about approximately 9:35. I drove in from 18th Avenue on the southwest Madison Street side of the Oregon Culinary Institute, so the north side of the main teaching building, the school.
Okay, and if you could grab that pointer there, it's behind your monitor, it's kind of hidden.
Okay.
Extend that, and before I have you start pointing at things, do you recognize what's marked as State's Exhibit 95?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
It's obviously a map, but there's labels on there. Did you place all of those labels on this map?
Yes, I did.
And so if you could, and also besides the labels, did you outline in red the Oregon Culinary Institute?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And could you explain what the arrows are for?
So the arrows are to show direction of travel for vehicular traffic. So a two-way street, for instance, would have arrows going in both opposite directions, like here. And if there's just one arrow, that's showing it's a one-way street and vehicles are only going that one direction.
Okay. And you said you came in on 18th?
Correct.
Can you kind of show us where you're talking about?
Yeah, so 18th right here. I came in and I then drove eastbound on Madison Street
Okay.
to the area right outside of Oregon Culinary Institute.
Okay. And was the mobile command center already set up when you got there?
I believe it was, or it might have just been coming. It might have not been there yet. It might have come a few minutes later after I arrived.
But nonetheless, when it did get there, do you recall where it was located?
Yes.
Could you kind of point to on the map where
See
that
if I
was
can
located?
reach this. It was Southwest 17th Avenue. And if I recall, it was just a little bit set back within the crime scene here, just to the north of Madison Street. So
Okay.
parked right in the street there.
And you can go ahead and take a seat.
Okay.
So we've already had this mobile command center briefly described by a police officer, a sergeant. And so what is the purpose of the mobile command center from the detective's perspective?
Well, I think it was discussed earlier. It was our mobile command, I called it mobile command post, I guess center, precinct, whatever, but it's basically a large RV. It's a workstation for us. And it's outfitted for Portland Police Bureau. It's owned by Portland Police Bureau, so it says Portland Police Bureau very clearly on the outside of it. It's well marked. It's pretty large. It has a seating area with a large table for several people to sit around, a big whiteboard for taking notes and kind of planning and strategizing. It has a restroom. It has another area with some snacks and water and things of that nature. So that command post is like our home on all call outs for large scale incidents, serious assaults, kidnaps, but mostly for homicides for my role. And I would go on to say that, one of the primary functions too is to give us a place. A lot of times, like for instance, this scene, we're out in the middle of the street. I think there was a Portland Timbers game going on that day. There's people everywhere. We do have tape up and police guarding our crime scene, but we could go into this mobile command precinct and we have privacy to discuss, critical confidential information that we don't want other people to hear, especially an active investigation of this scale.
And in a sense, is it sort of like a mobile office?
Correct.
Is one of the things that occurs inside of the mobile, and we're calling it different things, mobile command center, mobile command precinct, is one of the things that occurs is a debriefing of all of the initial officers to the detectives. And could you kind of describe what it is that I'm saying and what it is that you're expecting in those?
Yes, absolutely. So when I responded to the scene, for instance, I'll kind of walk you through a little bit of that just response as I park and find a place to park, get my notebook and my, things I need to do my work that day. I'll assemble with other investigators, but especially with my supervisor who was on the scene at that point, Sergeant Ken Wadham, just to find out, okay, where's the building, get a little bit of the lay of the land. And then when the mobile command precinct, if it's not there already or it arrives, we then move into that group as a group, as a team. So all the homicide investigators, any other investigators are assisting, possibly criminalist. And our sergeant at the time is sort of how would you say it, the conductor, right? So he'll have the dry board, he'll have markers, and he starts taking down information on that whiteboard that, the initial information that he already knew. Maybe he knows the name of a victim or what key witnesses already before the debriefing starts, and we get a case number, radio call time, and that starts to go on the dry board. Then the initial responding patrol officers that responded to the scene, this is our information gathering for us, where we have those officers come in one at a time with the most critical information, the nuts and bolts of what we need to do our job next as the investigative team arriving after the fact. They brief us on everything, times, witness statements that they've already collected, if there's potential video surveillance, things of that nature.
And as you saw, Officer Sergeant Cassandra Wells already testified as one of those officers that came in there to deliver that debriefing.
That's correct, yes.
I mean, I'm not going to ask you exactly how many, but about how many officers do you think came in to debrief initially that morning?
I believe a handful, if not maybe a couple more. So maybe like 5 to 8 different officers and sergeants as well.
And so it sounds like this is sort of just a information gathering stage, get everybody in the same place to share information. And then after that, what is sort of the posture, or what is sort of your role at that point?
So the supervisory sergeant, Ken Wadham, starts working with us, the lead investigators, to assign roles now. We're going to assign some tasks, some duties. Maybe we're going to have, some of the patrol officers, in this case, go and we've already been briefed a lot on what they've done with the students at the scene, but now we're going to maybe have them go a step further and actually take some steps to get a more detailed interview, or an interview if somebody hasn't been interviewed separately, individually, with all these different potential witnesses. We may have some officers right there at the scene. They're going to go do an initial canvas for video, just to see if there's something right there, right now, that we can get immediately. Then these assignments also get delegated to the investigators that have arrived. So, once a key witness has been identified, then we will send some homicide detectives or other detectives that are there on the scene to help us to go and do a follow-up, more in-depth interview, possibly recorded, and later a transcribed type interview that's going to be very valuable to the investigation. The lead investigators, like myself and Detective Posey, will then decide, some of the next steps for us. If we have all these tasks delegated among several investigators and officers, we may be trying to keep ourselves free for, in this case, maybe a family notification if we learn that a family member has arrived at the scene, which we did in this case, because that, takes a priority where we want to, glean as much information, as much intel from that family member about habits, morning routines, customs of the victim, that's going to help us in our investigation.
So even though there may be people to talk to, there may be video to collect, things like that, are you more directing that? It sounds like you're more directing that, and then keeping yourself available for other things that might be more pressing.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes, we're overseeing the information gathering, I think is a good way to put it, and then keeping ourselves available for maybe a priority that we believe is, a next step we need to take.
And you mentioned this, but sending people out to interview people, and in this case, would that include trying to interview all the students that were there?
Absolutely.
And maybe this doesn't happen right away, but would that also include an attempt to identify and interview all the students who either were late that morning and didn't show up, or that just didn't come at all?
Yes, it would.
And was that effort made in this case?
It was, yes.
Just, initially, seems maybe like it's kind of obvious, but was there an attempt to locate any video within the Oregon Culinary Institute?
Yeah, that was one of the first priorities that was explored.
And did you get an answer right away?
We did. So we have an officer that assisted us that day named Officer Aaron Sparling. Officer Sparling is dedicated as a forensic computer specialist, but he also assists with video collection and cell phone collection assistance for us, computer type collection and analysis. So he was one of our people, our technical people there, that was to, basically assigned to, hey, can you see if there's video there, like right there within the building? And he immediately was able to confirm there was not. There was no interior cameras in Oregon Culinary Institute, neither at the school or the administration building that I'm aware of, or any exterior cameras either.
And we're going to talk later about all of the large amount of video collection that did occur around the area.
Mm-hmm.
But besides where the Culinary Institute is, kind of where the mobile precinct was, I know it's a little light on the map, but it looks like maybe there's another building there, kind of behind where you mentioned where the mobile precinct was located.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know which building I'm directing you towards?
When you say behind the mobile precinct, is that what you said? Or behind Oregon Culinary Institute?
So you said the mobile precinct was sort of parked somewhere around here. Oops, right around there?
Yes.
I'm talking about this, what
Oh.
looks like a building. Is that a building?
Yes. So everybody that was at that scene today that had worked with Portland Police Bureau for at least a few years knew that that was our old Portland Police Property Evidence Division, that building. So again, this building right here, that's our old Property Evidence Division. And of course over here, many of you might know, this is Lincoln High School's football field and bleachers here. And I recall personally seeing a camera outside that building, and we were kind of excited that maybe there was a camera right there that might have caught footage, and it turned out the cameras were not functioning there at all.
So in the immediate vicinity, I mean, at this point, you've checked inside OCI, Oregon Culinary Institute, outside, at their admin building, and at the old Portland police property room.
Correct.
Nothing so far.
Correct.
Okay. So, video collection efforts continue though, correct?
Correct. I remember, Officer Aaron Sparling, of course, as I mentioned, was looking. There was also Officer Jackson Oldham, one of the patrol officers that initial responder, was also canvassing for video and or witnesses in the immediate vicinity of those 4 blocks around the building.
And we'll kind of come back to the collection of video surveillance at another time. But I want to talk to you more about the crime scene itself. When you, as a homicide detective, go to a scene like this, obviously the initial response is already completed. You're coming out quite a bit later. How is it that you get to view the scene? I mean, is that conducted in a very specific way for you to view a scene like this?
Well, yeah, there's a process that we try to follow, consistently, where we'll have our criminalists who are trained and specialized, like who you heard from earlier, retired criminalist Tina Willard, where they're trained and specialized in documenting and preserving evidence through video and photographs. So a lot of that process needs to be done initially. Granted, officers have already responded to the scene, have cleared the building, have taken other measures to make sure people are safe, to see if there's any other suspects or victims potentially. Then when the investigative piece starts, we have our criminalists start to preserve everything that we see in place. So we can go back and look at this years from now, like in this case, and still review all that information. We also have to get the potential consent of the business owner or the person in control of that property. And if we don't get the consent, then we may need to execute a search warrant or apply for a search warrant with Multnomah County Circuit Court Judge.
And in this case, by the time that you had an opportunity to view the inside of the building, had the criminals completed their initial photographing and things like that?
They had, yes.
And did you have to apply for a search warrant in this case to gain access to the building?
We did not. The president gave us written consent, Chef Brian Wilkie.
And do you recall which entrance you went into to get into the building first?
The side entrance from Southwest 17th Avenue.
Marked as State's Exhibit 1. I'm gonna move a little closer.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you point to the...
So this is adjacent to Southwest 17th Avenue over here, and this is a side door that enters the OCI building. And for perspective, that's the Madison Street side, and that's where the student entrance is over there. But I believe I entered on the 17th side with Detective Posey and some other investigators that day initially.
Was the door unlocked or did you have to be let in?
I believe we had to be let in. My recollection of that at that point.
Before you entered, and especially while the criminals are doing their job, is it your understanding that the building is completely secured?
Yeah, my understanding is that we were briefed again by initial patrol officers and supervisors that said they'd cleared the entire building. every closet, every room, anything they could access, they cleared, and there were no other people there. And if they saw nothing disturbed, nothing unusual.
And I'm gonna object to the hearsay portion of this testimony.
It's the effect on the listener, judge why he's doing what he's doing.
All right, I'll instruct the jury that I'll allow the question, the answer, not for whether this portion is true, but simply as to what it caused the detective to do next.
And so, detective, I mean, you've been briefed, you have this information, you're going into the building with this information. So what is it that you're doing? Was your goal when you go into a building?
Well, for Detective Posey and I think all the investigators that were assigned, we're looking for, first of all, we want to get the lay of the land. We want to understand the geography of the building, the layout, egress. We want to see where the exits are. Is there forced entry? We want to see if there's anything that looks unusual or out of place. We're trying to go in there with open minds and just take everything in, absorb it. And then, of course, we're going to be looking for specific evidence, things that, happened when this incident occurred. What's going to help us try to continue down through this investigation and get results.
You mentioned that one of the things you're looking for is points of entry and points of exit for a potential suspect.
Correct.
Did you have an opportunity to view and inspect each point of entry to this building?
Yes.
In your experience, did you think you found anything that suggested that there was forced entry into this building?
No, I did not. There were several fire exit doors, I believe 2 on the Jefferson Street side, as well as a main entrance to the restaurant. There was a door on the back side of near the trash can area that's adjacent to Southwest Madison and 17th, that northeast corner of the building. There was the student lounge door, the main door that you've heard about, where the students entered. And then there's that side door, the 17th Avenue person door, so for a person to walk through. Then there's the garage roll-up door just a little further to the north of that 17th person door.
And having already been briefed, had you learned that that storeroom door may have been open earlier that morning?
Yes.
When you were observing the building, was it open or closed?
The garage door?
Yes.
It was closed by the time I was there. Yep.
And so you looked at all these ingress and egress locations, and you're saying you didn't see anything that caused you any concern?
No. And we received those briefings, like I said, from other people that had observed these things and didn't see anything. We then conducted our own walkthrough, especially later. We did an additional overall walkthrough, and that was Detective Posey, myself, Detective Chamberlain. I believe there was maybe Detective Lawrence and maybe another 1 or 2, where we went through, looking through cabinets, looking through areas to see, is there something obvious that we missed that we need to look at? And then we also talked to the administrators about this and requested and directed them to do the same to make sure there's nothing disturbed, nothing, that they would notice is taken. I recall observing a lot of expensive, what I assumed was expensive culinary machinery, if you will, mixers, several large mixers and things that looked expensive to me. I remember observing lots of bottles of what looked like wine and possibly liquor for cooking. Everything kind of just laid out like it had never been disturbed. In the restaurant especially, there were coolers with beer. Everything just looked symmetrically placed, like it was not out, nothing was out of the ordinary. So I feel like we took great detail in having our entire team take several measures to, check on this to make sure about it. And I didn't see anything out of place.
In every room that you went into, or in your team, are you saying there's nothing that tipped you off as something being out of place?
I didn't see anything out of place throughout that process at all. I I was the one that walked. There's a ladder within the building. I believe that was back by the storeroom that goes to the rooftop. So I scaled the ladder and went onto the roof and searched up there as well, and didn't see anything up there, just in case by some chance maybe a subject or suspect, went up there and discarded some evidence or left something. There was nothing there out of the ordinary. We didn't see anything.
Given your years of experience in, say, specifically burglaries, would you expect to find something out of the ordinary?
I mean, based on what I had been briefed on, that a man had been shot to death in his business, that the garage door was open, I thought I was going to see maybe a robbery type incident where somebody came in there, saw a window of opportunity maybe to steal a wallet from somebody, steal cash from somebody, steal a vehicle from somebody, or steal something valuable. So I was looking, as a trained investigator, and I think all my coworkers were also looking for things of that nature, right? Something that's going to, tip us in one direction as to what caused this, why this happened, what was the motive. But we didn't find anything like that.
You mentioned not only items from the person or items from the school itself, but you mentioned a vehicle. Were you able to identify and locate Chef Brophy's vehicle?
Yes, we were. A 2010 Toyota Tacoma pickup that was parked right outside the person door I talked about, adjacent to Southwest 17th Avenue. It was parked almost at the corner of 17th and Jefferson, facing to the south. So it looked like it was registered to Daniel Brophy. It looked as if it had come in from likely the west, like I drove in on Madison, going eastbound, and then it turned southbound on 17th, the way it was then parked facing southbound right before Jefferson and right next to, just very close to that person or man door.
Did you locate any keys that went to that vehicle?
We did. So as we entered that door on the 17th Avenue side, there was a cart, like a large kind of utility cart that you could move a lot of items on, with a lower shelf underneath and a top shelf. Excuse me. On top of that shelf, I recall there being a plastic, maybe like purple cup with tea or something, some liquid in it. I believe it was tea on top, and then there was a set of keys on the top as well.
And did you confirm that that set of keys actually went to Dan Brophy's truck?
We did, yes.
And those were right by that person door?
They were right by the person door. As soon as you entered the door, the cart was just to your left, or right, sorry.
Sticking on this topic of what you're looking for, thinking you're potentially a robbery or something, later on, were you provided with a wallet that had been recovered off of Daniel Brophy's person?
Yes, we were.
I'm going to show you a photograph, State's Exhibit 43. Should pop up on your screen there in a minute.
Yep.
Could you describe what we're seeing in this picture and whether or not that is the wallet that you were provided?
Yes, that is the wallet. This is back at the central precinct with the wallet contents individually laid out and photographed, and I can see Daniel Brophy's Oregon driver's license on the left side.
Okay. I think it's pretty obvious, but not a lot of cash in that wallet, right?
Correct.
Okay. And we just heard from the medical examiner, I know you heard that testimony, that there was cash in his pockets, but not necessarily in his wallet. But are there other items in that wallet of note, specifically credit cards, debit cards, things like that?
Yes, there are credit cards. I see a Bank of America card to the right. I see a Visa, the red one down the lower left. Credit cards, debit cards, yeah.
Okay. And along with Daniel Brophy's ID card?
Correct.
separate driver's license, I suppose.
Correct.
Is there also medical cards, insurance cards, things like that?
There are, and I guess I missed it, there's an additional Visa card too. So the blue Bank of America card to the right, and like a tan Visa card just below the AAA cards. And then a Nordstrom, looks like credit card possibly.
In your experience as a detective, or just a patrol officer, are these items, could they be used to commit identity theft?
It happens all the time, yes.
So in your opinion, is there some value to these items, even though they might not have immediate cash value?
Yes, even now as a detective, I still get flyers and communications from patrol officers that send out flyers on wanted subjects or subjects of interest who have just conducted a car prowl, a robbery, a burglary, and they've gone out and used credit cards, debit cards immediately after the crime.
And at this point, the state would move to admit State's Exhibit 43.
No objection.
All right, 43 is admitted.
We're going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 30. Should pop up there in just a second. There we go.
Oh, okay, yes.
Do you recognize what we're looking at in this photograph?
Yes, this is the push cart I was describing earlier, right by the person door by Southwest 17th Avenue. That's the cup I was describing, and the car keys, as well as what appears to be possibly prescription glasses, a holder, or container.
And those keys, you've already testified that those did in fact go to Daniel Brophy's pickup truck.
Yes.
And just for in relation to where it's at, I mean, if somebody were to pick up those keys, walk out that door, how far are you away from Daniel Brophy's truck?
So if you look out that glass part of the portion of the door there, his truck was just parked to the right of that.
And at this point, the state would move to admit State's Exhibit 30.
I think it's already been admitted.
We don't have it marked as
All right.
admitted, Your Honor.
Objection.
Defense, okay. If it wasn't already admitted, it's now admitted.
Thank you. So you've talked about the school in general and walking around, and you're not really picking up on anything obvious, it sounds like at this point. At some point, do you make your way into Kitchen 1?
Yes.
And you had yourself an opportunity to view where Daniel Brophy was positioned?
Correct, yes.
At some point, I'm gonna go to the end and then have you back up and discuss why you got there. But at some point, did you sort of form an opinion as to where you thought he had been when he was shot?
Yes. For a few reasons. So as we came into Kitchen 1 from the door closest to the coffee station, I will call it, which is just outside of the doorway, where they give coffee and refreshments to students. As we come into that door, you know, the first thing I remember seeing are the two metal long tables that are right there in front of the door. And then off to the right is Mr. Daniel Brophy laying on his back, his head towards the door, feet towards the sink. The sink is directly opposite of those metal tables I described on the left. The sink is on the opposite wall to the right.
Could you use the pointer
Sure.
and point in the kitchen where that sink is that you're talking about?
Sure. So as we entered here, this is the coffee station. As we entered the doorway here to Kitchen 1, you could see two tables here. And you could see Daniel Brophy lying on his back, kind of in this area, with his head facing towards the doorway, and his feet, he's kind of laying on an angle his feet facing this way, on his back. And right here, very close to his feet, is a large kitchen, what do you call that? So two sinks, basically, two large kind of utility sinks there. Inside the two sinks, I recall there being large plastic water type containers. The container that was on the right part of the sink had water all the way to the brim in it.
Sorry, before you
Yeah.
move on, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 4. It's actually a video, but we're going to just show you a still image from that video.
Okay.
Can you see that then?
Yes.
Is this what you were talking about in those two sinks?
Yes, it is.
Okay, could you continue describing it as we look at this photo?
So that's the blue water container on the right is the one that appeared to be filled all the way to the top. Like looked like it was overflowing almost. To the right of the sink, I'll show you on the diagram here. So if I'm in kitchen 1 and I'm looking at the sink, which is here, just to the right in the corner, there's several, I think there were ovens here and cabinets and things of that nature. But on the floor is a large white ice shovel, like a shovel you'd use for a restaurant to go into a big ice bin and get a lot of ice out.
Okay, we're going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 41 while you're describing this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you kind of tell us?
Is it okay to point to this?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
please.
I'll try to talk loud enough. Let me know if you can't hear me. But so the ice shovel I'm referring to has a placard number 7 next to it. This is on the floor to the right of the sinks. This over here in this general area is that doorway that we entered, and the coffee station outside in the hallways over here. Mr. Brophy was laying here, feet near the sink, water overflowing in the bucket on the right.
And we're going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 42.
So there is our ice shovel.
Okay. Now, you talked about this is what you're observing, these water buckets, this what appears to be an ice shovel. What is going through your mind at that time about what is, as you're forming an opinion about what you think might have happened?
One thing I think I should also mention that I forgot to tell you about too, on the other side of the sink is a large ice bin, with the double doors like in a restaurant that you open and you can shovel a whole bunch of ice out. That's what I recall. So as I'm looking at this, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of understand it. It looked like he was filling a container of water, like, we had been briefed on that he may be preparing for students' arrival by getting water and coffee ready. That he was likely utilizing this ice shovel, I believe, to dispense ice by the sink with his back to the door. So he's working at the sink.
And you can go ahead and take a seat.
Okay.
Your Honor, at this point, I'd move to admit State's Exhibits 41 and 42.
No objection.
Admitted?
Has 4 been admitted? Or
Yes.
4 was pre-admitted, yes.
Okay, Detective, just real briefly on that water bucket and potentially, I guess, it's a separate ice bucket, or maybe they're the same, I don't know. When you were there, was the water running?
No.
Okay. I know you're there several hours later in the walkthrough, probably farther after that, but any ice apparent in the buckets at that point?
I don't recall if there was ice in the buckets.
Okay. Was there anything else about Chef Brophy's person or about anything nearby that kind of helped inform where you needed to take this investigation, other than this ice scoop, possible positioning, and lack of evidence of things being disturbed? Was there anything else about that helped form your where you were going to take this investigation?
Well, the positioning of his body, it appeared he had fallen onto his back from, whatever force was used against him. Of course, I later learned he'd been shot. or I'd learned he'd been shot, and then we learned more about the details of how he was shot. It appeared he'd been shot in the back to me while he's working at the sink, fallen down onto his back, and then it appeared he'd been shot again in his chest at close range.
Part of how you're forming that opinion in consultation and being there during the on-scene medical examiner's examination.
Absolutely, yes.
And I think we're gonna stop there, except I do want to have, one other question about, did you direct or were you part of the collection of the shell casings at the scene? Or was that already done before you came in?
Detective Posey and I were both there and present when Criminalist basically collected it, the shell casings. So we were there and we were present, and the direction was given to them to collect the casings.
Okay, and especially in the interest of time, giving my colleagues here a chance to ask you some questions, I think that we're going to limit our question to that, and of course, we'll have you back on the stand several more times.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Detective. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination on these limited issues.
Can we pull out your dandy map of the
sure.
area? Maybe pull that back up. Page 95, is that right? Yeah, I think it's page 95.
It is.
Next to OCI, you have drawn in a little building. I think it's kind of a gold little building right next to OCI on Jefferson.
To the left,
Yes.
this building?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't draw it in, it was on there, but
It was
yes.
already there?
Yes.
What is that building?
So that's I believe it's a condominium building that's several stories high, directly attached to the OCI building, just to the west of it.
And do you know how many units are within that building?
I don't know the exact number of the units. I know there's several balconies that I could see from outside. I could see there was a first floor garage space, because there's a garage door directly adjacent to OCI, just to the west, on facing southwest Jefferson.
Across Jefferson from OCI is another big building that takes up the whole block, is that right?
That's correct.
And on the lower level of that building, there's some retail, or at least there used to be, including Starbucks
Yes.
and some other businesses.
Correct.
But on the upper levels, how many stories does that building go up? Do you recall?
That one appeared to be several stories too. I don't know the exact number, but it looked large. Yes.
And that building also has balconies that look out over Jefferson.
That's correct, yes.
And that building also has residential units that face 17th, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And units that face Columbia?
Yes, it does.
And also units that face that little turnabout there at 18th?
2 units on this side, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
I believe it does, yes.
Okay. And again, do you know how many units are within that
I know
complex?
I know several, but I don't know the number.
And then I think the other thing that you pointed out was we used to know as the Portland Police Property Room, that was a kind of kitty corner, maybe across from OCI on Southwest 17th.
Yes, right here.
Okay. And that little L-shaped area that's in front of that building, that's a parking lot, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And that parking lot back in June of 2018 had both fencing and razor wire at the top to protect that area?
That's my recollection, yes.
Okay. And you testified that you were, maybe you saw or you were encouraged by what you could see as a big camera that was hanging off the side of that building that used to be the Portland Police Evidence Building?
That was my memory of it, and as I think about that, I believe an officer also talked about it, and that's what where we found out this particular officer or an investigator maybe confirmed that there was no camera taking footage or recording.
So there was a camera that was visible.
That's my recollection.
If
Yes.
a person looked at that building, there was a very, very visible camera. It's just that it wasn't recording.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very visible because I was at the command post seeing it, and I was very close to it. As you might recall, we were parked right next to the building in our
Yes.
command post,
Uh-huh.
and that's where I recall it being, somewhere on this corner or the wall.
So I think what you're describing is actually something different than what I'm describing. What you're describing is a camera that was hanging closer to the corner of Southwest 17th in the corner of that building closest to the street.
That's where I thought it was.
Okay.
If I'm mistaken, I may be, but I remember there being a camera on that building that you could see with the naked eye from the area of where I was standing on the street.
Okay. And then you talked about there's a bleacher area, at least there used to be. It's all changed now. Back in June of 2018, there was a bleacher area that adjoined the high school there.
Yes, I believe this is that area right here on the map.
Okay. And when you talked about cameras, were you also expecting to find cameras within that bleacher area, or did I misunderstand you?
No.
Okay, so really the only camera that you were hoping might function would be the camera that you saw visible there at the corner of the building on Southwest 17th.
Yeah, I thought that would be, so yeah, as you discuss this with me further and ask me about it, it may have been over here, because what I was thinking was it had an angle that might pick up this 17th Avenue area where the garage door was.
And that was one of those kind of older type cameras that what we used to think of as exterior cameras that are about this long.
This
and
big,
maybe
yeah,
this
I
big
remember
around.
that, yeah.
Yeah. You and I have called that the Portland Police Property Room. You can have a seat. I don't need to make
Okay,
you stand
thank you.
forever.
Thanks.
That property is still being marketed as the Portland Police Property Building, is it not?
Not to my knowledge, no. My recollection from, it was either an investigator or patrol officer that talked to the employees over there. I don't recall it still being associated with Portland Police Evidence. I thought maybe they're renting it out, but I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was all gone from there.
And do you know whether PPB still owns it?
I don't know that. That's why I'm speculating based on what you said, maybe, but I don't know that for a fact.
You talked about the various points of entry, so let's move that. Whoops, losing my ear. You said that you'd come in this entry, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And someone had to open that for you?
That's my memory, and I have a memory that it might have been the president of OCI, that
Okay.
Brian Wilkie might have assisted us because he gave us that consent to go in and check everything there.
And you later learned that that entry that was an alarmed entry, was it not?
Correct.
So if someone came through that door, at least when the alarm was set, they would have to disarm the alarm without setting off a siren?
That was my understanding from the multiple administrators with OCI,
Okay.
so including Brian Wilkie.
And you said that you and your partner and maybe some other investigators then did kind of a walk through the building to determine whether the other doors were.
Correct. In conjunction with just searching the overall building again, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So you looked at 3 doors that sat on the Jefferson Street side.
Correct.
And how did you check those doors? What did you do to them? Did you open them?
No, at that point, I didn't. Well, actually, I may have opened them, but mainly I was looking for any forced entry.
Okay.
We had also gone to the exterior side of the building and looked at those doors. And in the interior, I just went to see where these specific points of ingress and egress were. And I remember noting the different fire exits and then the main door, along with the other entrances I already talked about.
My question though is, did you open any of those doors or test any of those doors to see whether they were locked or whether they could be opened from the interior?
I believe I did with the fire exits because I believed you could push out. I think it had a push style that you could push out to get out. And I know from speaking to, from my briefing, that they had also checked these doors and examined them.
And when you checked these doors and examined them, there was no alarm that went off when you pushed open those doors on the Jefferson Street side?
Not that I recall, no.
You talked about another door that I believe it is at the end of that storeroom, closest, yes, back there. Am I right? Is that where that other exit
My
is?
memory was there was some door over here, I thought.
And you tested that door as well, or at least
Well, I remember
found it?
going over to that door. I remember looking by the trash cans, and I'm pretty sure I went through the door at one point when I was back there.
And again, that's a door that you can open from the inside and no alarm goes off when you do that.
Well, not when I was there.
Okay.
Not that I recall any alarms going off when I went through.
And is it true that the only other entry that, to this building is that student entrance, is that right?
So yeah, the student entrance,
Uh-huh,
the 17th Avenue side entrance,
the store, the
The
garage
garage door.
door.
and I believe that was it.
We captured them all?
I think so.
Okay.
Then there was the hatch to get up to the roof, which was somewhere in here. I can't recall exactly where, but there was a ladder.
Okay, so the ladder that you've described is back near that walk-in cooler?
That was my memory,
Did you
yes.
have to go into an office to access that ladder?
possibly.
You
I
just
don't,
can't
I don't
remember?
recall. I remember going up a very long ladder, very narrow, and it was, yeah.
So is that a ladder that you would pull down from the ceiling, or?
I
Or
thought
does
it
it
was a
just sit there all
fixed,
the
I thought
time?
it was a fixed ladder, if I
Okay.
remember correctly.
All right, so I'm assuming though that this is a building with a roof over it. So is there like a door to the roof?
So there was I believe it was a hatch that you have to push forward or push up to get up onto the roof. And then the roof was a very flat surface adjacent to the condominium building next door, which is several stories higher. I remember walking around the roof, the entire perimeter, looking over the edges and through gutters and stuff like that to make sure no evidence had been disposed of up there.
Okay. And this hatch that you went through after you climbed the ladder, was there a padlock on it, a lock on it? Do you remember?
I don't remember if I had a key or how that, I don't remember at this point.
Okay. We'll see if I can get you there just with my words, but at the end of kitchen 1, there are 2 little cubby holes that sit on the other side of the wall where those ranges are. Can you see what I'm talking about?
On the top or the bottom?
Right, oh,
Here?
you're so close, right there.
Okay.
Do you know whether that door, well, right now, let me ask you this. Do you know whether that door you're pointing to actually exists? Or if it did in June of 2018?
I don't recall. I don't recall going into that area at all, myself personally.
All right. And then there's the cubby hole right next to it.
This one?
Oh, let's scoot over this way. There, right there. Do you know what that is?
I recall that having a sign about janitorial or something, so mop buckets maybe and things like that.
Did you go in there?
I'm pretty sure we looked in there.
You remember what you saw?
I don't at the moment. No.
The other little area that we just talked about where we think maybe there was a door and maybe there wasn't. Do you recall going in there at all?
The one I just talked about that I
Yeah.
said I hadn't? No, I don't recall going in there.
Okay. Did you go into any little room that was right in that area that had kind of a two-way mirror or a two-way glass where a person could stand in that little cubby hole and look out into the kitchen?
To stand in this area
Yeah,
and look into there?
through through a window of sorts.
I don't recall that, no. Mhm.
You can have a seat again. I'm sorry, I
Okay.
keep making you stand up
That's
and
okay.
sit down and stand up and sit down. Were you able to access an area between the roof of OCI and the ceiling of an OCI? In other words, the kind of crawl space that existed between the ceiling and the roof?
And what part of OCI are you talking about?
I think it's throughout OCI that there's a ceiling,
Okay.
and then several feet above the ceiling would be the roof.
So I remember going onto the rooftop, the exterior rooftop,
Mhm.
if that's what you're referring to, but I don't recall. Maybe above the ice, near the storeroom in the ice freezer room.
Mhm.
There might have been an area up there. I think we looked up there on top of that. But that's all I remember as far as that goes.
But if there was an exposed ceiling in either the janitor closet or this little cubbyhole that's right next to it, you didn't see that yourself?
I don't personally recall seeing that, no.
You said that Mr. Brophy's truck was parked in front of OCI.
On the 17th Avenue side, correct?
Uh-huh. And you talked about getting some keys to that truck. Were you able to determine whether that truck had been left open or whether it was locked?
My memory of that is Detective Posey, I believe, unlocked it after we had been given consent to search it. But
Sure.
that might be a Detective Posey question.
Okay. And what happened to Detective Posey? Where is he now?
He's assigned to the Enhanced Community Safety Team, ECST, as a detective.
Now, you said you were somehow able to make a determination that no wine or liquor had been disturbed.
I didn't observe anything that looked obviously disturbed. Everything kind of looked, I mean, I recall looking in the shelves and seeing just bottle after bottle. Nothing's knocked over. There's no cabinet door partially open or, broken or anything like that. There's nothing on the floor underneath any of these areas that I noticed. And in each of these kitchens, they all appeared to have different ingredients, like I'm assuming for cooking, liqueurs, bottles of liquor, and things like that. And everything just looked placed neatly, like it had been stored, and nothing looked astray to me.
You weren't able to make a comparison to an inventory list, for example.
No, we relied on the administrators to check their inventory, and we directed them to do that. And we were not told of anything that they were aware of missing.
And did, for example, in these little various kitchens where there was a pantry that included alcohol, did you know what alcohol should be there?
No.
I wonder if you could, if we could show the witness state's exhibit 43 again. That was, I think we'd already described this as Dan Brophy's wallet, is that right?
Yes.
And you talked about some credit cards, and it looks like there's a $2 bill that must have meant something.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's also somewhere in there, I believe, a receipt from Sook Harbor. Do you see that?
On the right, next to the AAA, is
Uh-huh.
overlook. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that was in his wallet. And is there a date on that?
I don't know it by heart, and I can't see it from
You
this.
can't see it as too teeny?
Yeah.
Fair enough. We'll look at it later. But amongst all the other things that he'd saved in his wallet was this Carver receipt.
Yes, and it looks like there's I don't know, it looks like another receipt just to the right of that, maybe.
Okay.
And then a Wells Fargo receipt to the left of the wallet.
And you testified that there were still credit cards in his wallet.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Wouldn't one of the very fastest ways to be caught would be to use a murder victim's credit cards?
Possibly, yes.
Hey, do you have anything else, Chris? Okay. If we've missed something, we'll catch you on the next
Okay,
visit. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, redirect.
Just a few follow-up questions, Judge. Yeah, you can take that down. Detective Merrill, that parking lot south of what has been identified as the old Portland property room, was that actually a storage area for BMW?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I remember they were doing some kind of business there because one of our employees talked to them. And that sounds correct.
You recalled, and really didn't mean to prompt your memory, I thought that you had that, but
Yeah.
do you recall seeing several BMW luxury vehicles in that?
I remember there were luxury vehicles. I didn't, at the time remember BMW, but I remember they looked like there were nice vehicles parked there and several of them in the lot.
Okay. No indication that that lot had been disturbed recently?
No. Mm-mm.
Ms. Maxfield brought up the idea of the alarm panel that's just inside the side door on 17th. That morning, were you able to learn that it was Chef Brophy that disabled the alarm around 7:22?
Yes.
Okay, and that was information you had as part of formulating how you were going to continue your investigation?
Yes. And I believe Detective Posey first learned that through the OCI staff initially. Yep.
And of course, we'll talk about it later, but did that help inform you in about what kind of time frame you were looking at to when the murder possibly occurred?
Yes, absolutely. It gave us a good reference point to really, hone in on video surveillance resources, timeframes that we'd be looking for, seeing, where Chef Brophy, his route might have been on his way in, just to confirm some of those things, and then see if there were any other suspicious type vehicles or subjects in the area at that time.
You touched on this, but I just want to confirm because Ms. Maxfield asked you a question about it as well, but that is, not only are you and the other detectives going through this building trying to determine if there's anything obviously disturbed, missing, things like that. Obviously, you don't have an inventory list of everything in this building.
Correct.
But you kind of touched on this. Didn't you also have the administrators of the building also go through and look very detailed through the building to see if they could determine whether they thought something was missing as well?
Well, yes. I mean, again, we're looking for a motive here. We're looking for why did this happen? And we couldn't obviously see anything, just through our several layers of our teams going through the building meticulously looking for something like this that might show us, if there was a motive why somebody came in and did this to Chef Brophy. And so, yeah, of course, I mean, we leaned on the administrators who know the building much better than us. They, know what, belongs, doesn't belong, what may be out of place, so forth. And so we relied on them to confirm not only what we observed, but what they have the most information about.
Okay, and did they report to you that they were missing anything?
No.
And is that a pretty common thing for you to do, especially in burglary, whether it's residential or otherwise, to confirm with the homeowner or resident or whatever, to have them verify whether things are missing?
Yes, absolutely.
And just last question here, that's Ms. Maxfield asked you about, isn't a quick way to get caught is by using a murder victim's credit cards or other information? And you replied yes. There's also a quick way to not get caught, but still make off with some stuff, to just take the cash off the person, and which is fairly anonymous.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I have no further questions.
Detective Merrill will have you step down then.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe that we'll be done for the day.
Yes, Your Honor.
Before I leave the bench, is either side going to want to put anything on the record?
I don't believe so.
No, Your Honor.
All right, then we'll be in recess till tomorrow.
Okay, we will go ahead and go off record interview. All rise for the jury.